Hey everybody, what's going on? Welcome into another episode of Happy Hour here at the Pack a Day Podcast. Sorry if I'm a little disjointed at the beginning here. I had a little bit of a technical issue, but thanks so much for joining me. I'd also grabbed my beer at the last second. Today we're going with pistachio cream ale from Indeed Brewery. Not sure if I've had that one on here before, but absolutely one of my favorites. But gather around, grab a drink, welcome in. Cheers to everyone for joining today. Obviously, same thing as usual. We'll do a Q&A. Any questions that you guys have, appreciate you being here. Any super chats will go to the top of the list. I'll make sure to get to those, and I'll clearly try to make sure I get to as many of the other questions as I possibly can. Not sure how long I'm going to be hanging out today. Probably like 30, maybe 45 minutes. Don't think I'm going to go a full hour today, but we will see what the day brings and kind of go from there. So I'm going to take a drink of this beer. You guys start asking your questions, and then we will get to it right away. And cheers, Vero Gaming. Appreciate all of you guys. All right, little something, Doug. Nice, like to hear it. I can't remember if I've had that one at before, but I know a lot of people really like it. All right, what do we got here? What is the T. Higgins thing? I saw somebody else who very much looked like a troll that was posting about it, but I didn't like. I'm sure he's not going to be a Packer, obviously, in any capacity. But like, is there some sort of like groundswell of support going for T. Higgins to the Packers all of a sudden? All right, really appreciate the chat. Income options trading. Let's see. Could you give a prediction of week 1 for the Packers, and what kinds of things would you make it either a success or a failure? It's the Bears. That's winning the game comes down to whether it's a success or a failure or not. There's no two options when it comes to that. It's just that's simply it, especially with the amount of smack talk that's been going on between fan bases. And especially when you consider that this was the single worst team in football a year ago. Yes, it's in Chicago. No, I do not expect it to be easy. And I could see this game going in either direction. I think Chicago is lightly favored at the moment in Chicago. But this game comes down to whether or not they ultimately pick up the win or not. If they do, it'll be a success. If they do not, it will be a failure. There's no two ways around that one. If they were the worst team in football season ago, I do think it's a great litmus test for both teams, both Chicago and Green Bay. I think it's a great litmus test for Justin Fields. Is he taking a step as a passer and as a quarterback? Same thing for Jordan Love. How can he play against this new Chicago defense that looks, improved on paper? Tyreek Stevenson, their second round pick, looks like the real deal. Their 2 defensive tackles that they drafted are impressive. They go out. Well, Tremaine Edmonds, not a great introduction in the preseason game, but we know that he's been better than that in Buffalo in the past. But either way, this should be an improved Chicago team one way or the other. As far as prediction goes, we'll get into that a little bit more next week as I start breaking down the film a little bit more of Chicago and making a final prediction for that game. But success or failure will definitely be down to whether or not the Packers win that game or not. Hebes in Sheboygan, thank you so much for listening in every day. Do I find it odd that a lot of attention has gone away from Jordan Love and gone to our safety room and kicker? I mean, I think we're in the day, especially I can speak for myself, where we talk about this stuff 365 days a year, and there's going to be new conversations and new topics that pick up every single day. I think right now Jordan Love's a little bit on the back burner because I think he kind of showed what we wanted to see in training camp and preseason, and everyone's at the point right now with Jordan Love where they just need to see it. They just need to see what he can do in a full regular season when teams are game planning. There's not much else to talk about. I think had he had an awful preseason and an awful training camp, we'd be talking about it a lot more. I think if, he went out and completely lit the world on fire, we'd be talking about that a little bit more. I thought he was really good. I thought we saw the things that we needed to see, and now it's just like a wait and see. And there's not much else really to break down at this point for Jordan Love. We saw what we needed to see, but it's all, it's just going to come down to the regular season. So I think that's why Love is not getting a ton of attention. As far as like the safety room and the kicker, I think that's more flavor of the week, topic of the moment sort of stuff. With Anders Carlson, it's recent. We don't know what to expect from Anders Carlson. And I think there's some level of hesitation and trepidation there, especially when you're coming off, we always talk about 30 years of Favre and Rodgers. Well, we just had quite an impressive run from Mason Crosby as well. And yes, there was a little bit of a gap in there if memory serves. But before that, Ryan Longwell, like the Ryan Longwell, Mason Crosby, period is pretty darn impressive for kickers as well. Even going back to Chris Jackie before that. And yes, there are some gaps in there, unlike the Rodgers Favre stuff, but Green Bay is not used to having, a inexperienced kicker that, just isn't like kind of expected to be good. So I think that's why there's a little bit more talk about unders, and it's just the complete unknown there. And then as far as safety, I think that I probably had something to do with that with my tweet today and talking about safety. But you talk about a team that there's at least potential answers at every other spot. Jordan Love could be really good at quarterback. You know what you have in Jones and Dillon. Emmanuel Wilson's kind of fun at running back. There's all this talent at wide receiver. You don't know what it's going to become, but there's so many fun pieces there. At tight end, you've got Musgrave and Kraft. The offensive line's returning all of its starters and has some really fun players that have, high upsides. Zach Tom's a great example of that. Elton Jenkins is clearly a, really, really great player at this point. Myers is a question mark. Runyon will be a free agent after this year, but even guys like Rasheed Walker, like you've got answers baked in there. Defensive line, Devontae Wyatt, TJ Slayton, Carl Brooks, Colby Wooden, all potential answers to the defensive line question. Inside linebacker, Quay Walker. Corner, guys like Carrington Valentine's a fun potential answer there. Outside linebacker, Kingsley Enagbare, Lucas Van Ness. You've got answers at kicker, Anders Carlson. We don't know what that's going to become. Punter, Daniel Whalen. You don't know what that's going to become. You have potential answers at every one of those positions. There's still questions, but there's potential answers there. At safety, it's just questions. Like the best you can maybe come up with is Anthony Johnson Jr. Like he could potentially be somebody that maybe gets involved at some point this year and is under contract in future seasons. That's the best there possibly is. There's no player right now that you're super excited to watch. I don't think anyone's pining to watch Rudy Ford or more of Darnell Savage from what we've seen over the past few seasons. And even if those players, like let's say Darnell Savage goes out as the best season of his career, looks like a Pro Bowl caliber safety. Guess what? He's a free agent next year. And now you have to pay him, and you're paying him based on, do we think that 1 year is legitimate, or was like the other 4 years of Darnell legitimate? So even that, like you're probably going to have to give him an exorbitant contract for that one season of Pro Bowl level play. And that can be always an issue as well. I'm not exactly sure what you're going to get out of that. So I think safety is just a massive question mark that you don't have good answers to. Anthony Johnson Jr. and the new safety, Zane Anderson, like those are the only two players under contract at safety after this year. And it's not like you've got great answers there either. So I think that's why safety and kicker are being talked about a little bit more, but more importantly, just because there's nothing left to go over with Love until we actually see him play in games. All right, a couple super chats came in. Thanks so much for that. Ian, appreciate you. How do you compare the way we looked last year in camp to this year? Thanks for all you do. I'm happy you get to do this full time. Me too, Ian, and really appreciate that. That's a really interesting question. I think they look more loose. I did a podcast yesterday where I was talking to somebody about this, and they are like, the team looks more loose. They look more energized. They look playing more as a team together, and Aaron Rodgers is gone. Is that a part of it? That's a fun maybe narrative to talk about a little bit. I do think they look a little bit more loose and maybe playing a little bit more as a team. That's great now in training camp. What happens if they don't win football games? How does this team react to that? Because at some point this year, they're probably going to face some adversity. They're probably going to go through a stretch where maybe they don't win some games. Then do they play with the same level of energy and cohesiveness? Is there that same team camaraderie? Is everyone a little bit more loose at that point? So yeah, I think they're a little bit maybe more loose right now, but as tight as Aaron was and as demanding as he was at times, they won a lot of games with that guy at quarterback. And that's ultimately the name of the game, is how can you win and how can you find a way to get yourself into the Super Bowl conversation? And right now it's great that they have that camaraderie and that team building and they're playing loose and they're playing together, but we need to see what happens when the regular season comes and when they hit that adversity. Do they still have that? And if they do, that's great. As far as overall talent, I just think it's a different season. I think that burden of expectations is gone a little bit. For 30 years, basically, we've been saying like, hey, it's Super Bowl or bust for the most part. And this year, you're just kind of seeing like, hey, we've got some really fun pieces. How do they come together and can they improve throughout the course of the season? And I think with that comes maybe a little bit more of a relaxed attitude for Packer fans and not quite so much of that burden of it's Super Bowl or bust. At least that's kind of how I feel with it. And one of my favorite seasons of all time was unfortunately the year that they ended with the Corey Webster interception in the NFC Championship game. That team that year was picked, 7-9-ish, somewhere in that range. And they go to the NFC Championship game. And to have that where you didn't have the burden of expectations so much going in and you're kind of being like, all right, maybe they're going to be an 8-8 team. Maybe they can sneak into the playoffs. to being a game away from the Super Bowl, that was like the most fun season. Only lost 3 games in the regular season. That Seahawks game in the snow the week before, where they go down, I think 14-0 in the very first portion of that game. And then they just run it down Seattle's throat for the remainder of the game, stick to their game plan. Ryan Grant has the massive game. Brett Favre's throwing snowballs. Like, that season was magical, but you didn't have that burden of expectation going in. I'm not saying they're going to finish 13-3 and go to the NFC Championship game this year, but I have that same similar feeling of you don't have that huge expectation and that, burden on your shoulders. And I think a part of that is playing into the equation as well. Appreciate the chat, Ian. All right, Income, thanks so much again. And you are more than welcome, my friend. All right, Lee, what do we got here? Love what you do. Do players who were cut get paid anything for their time in training camp? Thanks so much, Lee. That's a great question. I do think there is some payment during their time in training camp, but don't quote me on that. That is like the one thing. I'll be totally honest with you. What I care about, and this is going to sound very harsh-ish, but what I care about is how it affects the Packers and their salary cap, and anything they do in training camp, or like when they make the playoffs and get payouts for the playoffs, it doesn't affect their salary cap. So that isn't anything that I've ever really looked into that much, because it doesn't affect the Packers and what they ultimately do from a salary cap standpoint. So I don't have the perfect answer to that. I do know if they get injured or hurt and they end up on IR, they get the injury settlements and things like that. I do believe there is some payment during camp, but don't quote me on that. Clearly, if they have a signing bonus where they get that up front, they get that no matter what. If they are released, they still got that signing bonus when they initially signed. That is cash paid immediately, just like a real life signing bonus would be. But maybe somebody in the chat will know a little bit better if they get any sort of stipend or payout in training camp. I think there is, but don't quote me on that. All right. No, Joe, we do not root for a mediocre season from Savage. Still want him to succeed. I want all these safeties to succeed. I hope Rudy Ford and Darnell Savage and Anthony Johnson Jr. and all those guys go out to have the best year ever, and safety looks way better than we're expecting it to be. You can cross whatever bridge you want in the future as to whether or not you want them to come back and sign on the team. You figure that out later when when you have to make that decision, but you still want them to do well. Just like individually for them as the players and them, being Green Bay Packers, you want to see them succeed, and the team, it's better if they do well. So I'm just saying, like, even in the best case scenario where Darnell Savage and Rudy Ford go out and have Pro Bowl caliber seasons in the best year of their career, they're still unrestricted free agents next year. And now you have to decide, do you want to pay them based off of that 1 year of production, let them walk out the door, and maybe let a really good safety who just had their best season go? Like, that still gets a little bit complicated. So no, still cheer for them to do well. But again, even in that scenario, there's a little bit of complications that comes with that. All right. Owen, great question. Oh, it's Shallow Hal. Sorry, we'll get back to you, Owen. Is it $3,200 per week? That could very well be right. But I do think there is some sort of payment. I don't think they just get nothing during their time in camp. And remember too, like, they can get fines in preseason games. Like, that's always the crazy part too, is like somebody could get fined more than what they make in the entire preseason. So, but yes, I do think there is a payment that goes out. Owen, why do you think Tariq Carpenter didn't make the roster? Seemed like a good special teams player and played in a thinner linebacker group. Good question. So I think the main reason is a few things. My gut, and just on some of his interview answers that he gave, my gut feel is that I don't think he really liked being a linebacker, and that, I think, played a part into it. You watch his tape at linebacker, wasn't very good. He wasn't taking to it naturally. Let's just put it that way. Like, even if you remember, like Raven Green, who, he ended up being more on the outs because he just got injured all the time. But he kind of took to that hybrid linebacker position and was really fun playing it. He did a nice job. Tariq, I don't think he took to it quite as well. Now, he has the special teams prowess, but there's only so many guys you can keep on the roster just for their special teams. And you've already got guys like Eric Wilson and Dallin Levitt, and Tariq would have been a third that you're just basically keeping. I think the new safety, Zane is probably just a special teams guy as well. You can only keep so many of those guys just based on their special teams. And if Tariq maybe wanted a fresh start at it with a team that was maybe going to play him at safety, or at least give him that opportunity, I could see them just saying, like, all right, you can go try that elsewhere. Now, you don't release him just for the sake of releasing him and just to make him happy. You got to have business kind of come first in that situation. And I think that's probably why they kept him on the 53 initially. But I think once they found a couple players that they wanted on the roster, it probably wasn't that difficult of a decision. And once he was released, I kind of had a feel of, I didn't think he was going to be back. I thought he'd find another team, and that's exactly what happened. He is now with the Pittsburgh Steelers, if memory serves correctly. All right. Real Street Sports Talk. How did Dobbs look on the sidelines at practice? So I'll say this: there's levels to like players kind of like returning from injury, and it's not always an exact science. The guys that are working on the inside usually are further away. The guys that are working out on the outside are usually closer. And then you can kind of tell with the guys on the outside that are ramping up and like really getting ready. I think Dontavian Wicks is the closer of the two. I think Dontavian Wicks, like I can pretend to be a lot of things. I cannot pretend to be a doctor. I have no idea where they're at physically just by looking at them. No idea. But I will say Dontavian Wicks was doing a lot of things that would make me believe that he's probably a little bit closer to being ready to come back than Romeo Dobbs. The follow-up to that is Romeo Dobbs was outside working and doing some stuff. So that usually makes me believe that, again, he's closer than usually, the guys that are inside and maybe not close to coming back yet. So there's never a perfect science to it. Hamstrings can be tricky. Any of those soft tissue things where you don't want to rush people back. I'm sure they'll be cautious with it. I think we'll have a lot better feel next week on if he's practicing Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, or if it continues to be an issue through the course of the week. So I don't, either way, just based on how he's working to the side and based on where he's at, I wouldn't expect it to be a long-term issue. I just think it's probably the Chicago game that's more in question. And then we'll kind of see from there, but we're not going to know much until next week. All right. The Finesse Kid, thanks so much for the question. Happy Friday. Any thoughts on early positions that will need to be prioritized for the next season in 2024, whether that be through the draft or free agency? We just talked about one of them, safety. Anthony Johnson Jr. is basically the only potential upside play at safety that's under contract next year. That's just what it is. So that's going to be a position that they attack very aggressively in the draft next year, one way or the other. Remember, they should, fingers crossed, have 2 first-round picks next year as well. But I think they'll attack safety pretty aggressively with multiple bodies in the draft and probably a free agent signing or 2 as well. That'll be a position that gets remade. I think offensive line is one that will have to be looked at as well. When you look at that position, David Bakhtiari will have 1 year with a really big number for his contract next year. They'll have to make that determination. Josh Myers, they'll have to decide, do they want to continue on with that experiment or do they need to start going in a different direction? John Runyon Jr. is a free agent. Yosh Nijman's a free agent. Now, the great news is even if all the guys that we just mentioned, every single one, meaning Bakhtiari, Josh Myers, John Runyon Jr., and Yosh Nijman, even if all 4 of those guys are gone, you at least still have a core that of maybe Rasheed Walker at left tackle, Elton Jenkins at left guard or center, Zach Tom at center or right tackle. You could probably add a couple guys in there, maybe like a Sean Ryan or someone like that who could maybe get on the field. You at least have some pieces there. And I don't think all of those guys are going to be gone by any means, but they're going to have some decisions to make. And don't be surprised if they start building up that offensive line a little bit more again in the draft, especially on the interior where they're a little bit light at the moment, unsure of what they have in Myers. And like I mentioned, John Runyon Jr. is going to be a free agent. Then running back's the other one. At running back, you've got Aaron Jones who will have 1 year left on his deal at age 30 at an exorbitant price. A.J. Dillon, who's a free agent, and then you'll have Emmanuel Wilson out there as well. So I think running back, offensive line, safety would be the 3 that you're probably looking at. Kicker could be one, depending on how Anders Carlson kicks this year. Punter could be one, depending on how Daniel Whalen punts this year. But I would say safety, offensive line, and running back. And again, you could end up with offensive line and running back being totally fine. If they decide to keep Bakhtiari, they re-sign Nijman and Runyon, Myers has a good year. Even if 2 or 3 of those things happen, you're probably fine and maybe don't need to address it as much. If you decide just to keep Aaron Jones and re-sign A.J. Dillon and Emmanuel Wilson looks good, running back and offensive line then are not in need, and it's just safety. So it's just going to kind of be a wait and see, but those are the 3 positions off the top of my mind. Vex, thanks so much for the chat. I'm very concerned about safety. Do we even have any developmental players who could be a good safety in the future? Doesn't seem like it. Anthony Johnson Jr. is the only one that's in that category. And he's a 7th round pick who does not look ready to start yet. Wouldn't shock me at all if he ends up getting an opportunity to start at some point this year just because of the play at safety, injuries, whatever it may be. So I could see if they start off with a poor record, they might just be more willing to get some of their younger guys in the game and start developing them and see what they have. There's a variety of ways that he could get in. I do think he has some potential, but it's probably not 2023 potential as much. And we'll have to, sort of wait and see to see what he becomes at safety. But outside of that, it's nothing. And this is the one where it's really hard to figure out. And I got a lot of interesting responses on this when I posted it to Twitter today, because I said the one, I think Brian did a phenomenal job sort of rebuilding, but kind of not rebuilding and sort of trying to accelerate the process. I think he's had a really nice offseason overall, like really nice. But safety is so hard to figure out. You have 6 safeties on the roster, 6. Only one of them has any developmental upside at all, and that's Anthony Johnson Jr., who's under contract and is a 7th-round pick. Everyone else outside of Zane Anderson is a free agent next year, and none of the guys are like starting caliber players right now. So you have 6, 1 light developmental player, 4 not under contract next year, and no real starting caliber safety. So that is about as bad of, like, you want to be one or the other. You want to be, hey, we've got good safeties now. They're getting old, and we're going to need to have a plan in the future, but at least we're good at safety now. Or we've got a bunch of developmental players. They're not great now, but we think they can be good in the future, and we're going to start developing them right now. You want one or the other. Or maybe one safety is a starter now, the other is a developmental guy. You can get through that as well, but you can't have neither. You can't have guys that are not ready to play right now and you don't feel comfortable with right now, and really no developmental prospects on the roster. And multiple people pointed out, how much can you do in one offseason? There's only so much money to spend. There's only so many draft picks that you get. And he had a lot of other things he needed to address. And I get that. My bigger point is, could you have found a way to use a couple of those Grant Dubose and Lou Nichols 7th-round picks on some safeties, brought in a few more undrafted free agents, just brought in some younger, quicker, faster guys in some capacity? Maybe they wouldn't have worked out. That's okay. I just would have liked to have seen more of a, if you're going to be not great at safety, be not great and developing, not just not great and guys that are on 1-year deals. That's where I would put it at. So I think it's fair to be concerned about safety. It's not going to be the be all end all. This, like I said, this team's not ready to compete for a Super Bowl right now anyway. Not saying they can't, not saying that they, at some point, crazier things have happened in sports, but it's not likely. So it's okay, but you'd like to see a little bit more developmental players there at that position. All right, what else we got here? Michael, thanks for the chat. Who's my dark horse candidate to have a standout year? That is a very good question. I think there's a couple names that come to mind. I'm just kind of going through the roster in my mind. I'll go with 2. TJ Slayton would probably be number 1 on my list. I'm hesitant to say TJ Slayton because we've seen these flashes before, and he hasn't been able to be consistent with it. I feel like he's had a very consistent training camp in preseason, though. Anytime he got in preseason, he was making an impact. So I think there is a real hope there that this is not just a couple flash plays, that this is a real step in the right direction to being a legitimate, consistent down in and down out player for TJ Slayton. But that's the one that I'm excited about and that I think is really ready to take a step. The other is Kingsley Enagbare. And he showed it in training camp and preseason. He is taking a legitimate step. I go back to last year, and the one thing that I saw is like, he just needs to put on some functional strength. He's got a great move set. He knows how to get to the quarterback. He cares about the game. He's a little Energizer bunny at the position. Like, he works hard. Like, everything else was there. He just needed to put on some functional strength and kind of get some NFL experience. He did that. He got that. He looks way better this season, and I do think he's legitimately ready to take a significant step. So I'll say JJ Enagbare, TJ Slayton, 2 guys that I'm really keeping my eye on defense. Vex, thanks again for the chat. Which NFC North team will underperform most this year? I have to go Minnesota. And, would it shock me if they ended up being a playoff team again? It wouldn't. They've done a really nice job of making the most of what they've had and find ways to win games, even if they're close. I'm a Brewer fan. All right. So the Brewers do a very nice job. Like, they get crap all the time of like, well, their run differential's not that good. And they kind of find ways to work the system to figure out ways to get a few extra wins here and there. Yeah, that's what they should be doing. And I think Minnesota has a little bit of that in them as well, where they find ways to win games, and it's not always pretty. They don't always have the greatest, point differential in the world. And sometimes it ends up costing them in the postseason. So I think they deserve some level of credit for that. But it's a team that had a negative point differential a season ago. They lost in the first round of the playoffs. They lose Delvin Cook. They lose Zadarius Smith, who had an awesome year for them last year. They lose Dalvin Tomlinson, who had an awesome year for them last year. Adam Thielen, Eric Kendricks, Patrick Peterson. think there might be a player or two that I'm forgetting as well. Like they lost a lot of guys that were very impactful on that team last year. I do think Jordan Addison's going to be really good. We'll see what TJ Hawkinson brings to them in his full, second season and first full season with them at tight end. So they have some potential answers there, but I would be surprised Chicago can't get worse, right? Like they were the worst team in football. Green Bay, I think they're a complete unknown. And I think a lot of people are expecting somewhere between 6 and 9 wins. I think that's where they're going to fall. Detroit has a little bit better possibility of underperforming because I think people are expecting them to take a significant step and maybe even really, really compete in the NFC. And if that's the case, if you're a Detroit Lions historian in any capacity, know that every time they take one step forward, they usually take 3 steps back just as a franchise and in their history. So they could as well, but Minnesota is the one that kind of stands out to me the most. All right. Salty Jordy. That's a great name. Andy Hopewell as well. Do you think Matt LaFleur will actually lean into the run game this year, hoping for tons of play action based on feeding the AJs? I think he is going to be the same coordinator / coach that he has always been with slightly different emphases. His MO and what he is known for and what he wants to accomplish as a coach and a coordinator is attacking the other team's biggest weakness. And I love that. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Now, you still have to play to your strengths and do what you do best. And I think sometimes he gets caught up a little bit too much. And those are the games where Aaron Jones will have 3 carries and you get to the end of the game and look at the box score and you're like, how does Aaron Jones have 3 carries? Like it does get caught up from time to time. But I think he's going to look at the opposing team and say, where can we win? Is it a big Luke Musgrave game? And can we find multiple mismatches for him? Is this a game where we need to get the ball down the field to Christian Watson and Jaden Reed? Is this a game where we need to be a West Coast offense and feed the ball to our running backs, tight ends, and receivers in the short and intermediate, layer of the field and let them do the work after the catch? Is this a power run game? Is this a zone run game? Like he will figure out what the other team does poorly and try to make sure that he has the players in the right position to exploit those matchups. And this team has every piece that you need to be successful. You need a running back who can do it all and is a little bit more of a change of pace playmaking back. All right, we got Aaron Jones. You need a power back. All right, you've got AJ Dillon. You need a down the seam tight end that can stretch the field a little bit. All right, you got Luke Musgrave. You want your playmaking wide receiver, Christian Watson, your do everything wide receiver, Romeo Dobbs, your possession goon, Alan Lazardish wide receiver. You've got Malik Heath, your slot wide receiver, gadget wide receiver. You've got Jaden Reed. You've got the answers on this team to any questions or like any weaknesses that the other defense has. Now it's just figuring that out and going out and executing your game plan. But I do think there'll be a little bit more emphasis on play action in middle of the field, passing specifically. But if the run game's not working, they're going to throw the ball. They're going to have trust in Jordan. I think we saw that throughout camp and in the preseason. It's not just, well, we've got a young quarterback, we need to run the ball 30 times. I think they're going to still look for those mismatches, and they trust Jordan to execute whatever game plan is necessary. And if that's throwing the ball 35 times a game, I think they're going to trust Jordan to do that. For better or worse, I just think that's going to be the case. Oh, Coco Mike from Greece. Hey, thanks so much for joining. Really appreciate that. You are very welcome. I thought there was maybe going to be a question there, Mike. I didn't read it ahead of time, but you are very welcome and welcome in from Greece. Cheers to you, my friend. All right. All right. Coco Mike, who is your one player who are you most excited about? That's another really good question. I think it's got to be the 2 rookie playmakers, Jaden Reed and Luke Musgrave. Those 2 for me, they have legitimate opportunities to be big time players in this league. And that's what I want to see. How close to their potential do they reach? If they're good players, like Musgrave turns out to be a nice tight end and Jaden Reed's a nice little slot option, that's fine. But I talked about this. There was an episode I did, I think really early in the offseason of, it's great that Green Bay has all of these really fun young pieces, but this is a league where superstars win you championships. You have to have a handful of Patrick Mahomes, Travis Kelce's, Tyreek Hill's, Chris Jones, those, Honey Badgers, like those type of guys. You need a handful of guys that they're just amazing, amazing players. That's what Green Bay needs right now. They need some of these young players, the Christian Watsons, the Luke Musgraves, the Jaden Reeds, the Jordan Loves, Devontae Wyatt, Quay Walker, we can go on and on for all the young players that are on this team. they need them not to just be good players. It's great to have good players, and I want all of them to be good, but you need a few of them to be superstars. And that's what I really want to see this team take that next step is, can they develop some of these players into superstars? And Christian Watson, Luke Musgrave, Jaden Reed on offense, they have that potential. No idea if they're going to reach it or not, but that's what I want to see. And I think that's what makes it so exciting. We got a glimpse into Christian Watson last year and exactly what he's capable of. Can he take a step this year? But now it's, can Luke Musgrave and Jaden Reed have a similar type of trajectory to what we saw from Christian Watson last year, and even maybe above and beyond that? So those are probably the two that I'm most excited to watch this year. Big Haas, thanks so much for the question. The answer is unequivocally yes. This is a very make or break season for Josh Myers. There's a world in which he's just fine and they go into the draft in free agency next year, don't want to spend a ton of money on a free agent center, go to the draft and maybe the draft just doesn't go their way and they can't get a center. I guess they could always just move Zach Tom over in that scenario maybe, but maybe there's a world where he's okay this year and they can't really find a replacement and he ends up just being here for one more year, being okay next year as well. But I think this is a make or break season for Josh in the realm of, for him, if he doesn't improve this year, I think you can just say he is who he is. Like, we just know it's going to be inconsistent Josh Myers, and there's going to be some moments where he looks pretty good, and then there's some moments where you're like, what are we doing here? And that's what I want to see differently from Josh this year is, can he find that level of consistency? And if he can, you've got a nice center. Like, I'm not saying he's ever going to be Pro Bowl, all pro caliber player, but if you see the consistency out of Josh, you can see him being one of your top 5 guys and a legitimate starter in this league. But if he can't show that this year, then you just kind of know who he is. And he will be one of those players that maybe he doesn't get replaced right away next year, but Green Bay will constantly be looking for a way to upgrade that position until they find that next guy. So I think it is a make or break year for him in that capacity. All right. This is a great question, Owen. Why do you think Aaron was more hesitant to target the middle of the field, and how come Love seems more willing to do so? Aaron, for better or for worse, and far more often better than it was worse, but for better or worse, was the most risk-averse quarterback in the history of the world. He is the most risk-averse thrower of any ball in the history of the world. That's just who he was. Now, you want to go and have like an ultimate casino level cheat code going into every single game, you win the turnover battle and you win the game more often than not. You are like the casino, you are the house, everything tilts in your favor. So going into a game where you knew that your quarterback was probably not going to turn over the ball, and they did always a great job of hanging onto the ball from a fumbling standpoint, at least more often than not, at least until they got into big games. We don't need to talk about those, but they wouldn't turn over the ball, and they went into every game with basically a casino style house advantage because every odd tipped in their favor because they weren't going to turn over the ball because Aaron was so careful with the football. And that had a lot of advantages to it. However, you have to be able to attack the middle of the field. And Aaron became so risk averse that he just didn't want to attack that level of the field, like almost no matter what. Now, a couple things to add on top of that. The first is that you have to remember, especially these last couple seasons, they didn't have the guys to attack over the middle of the field that much. Robert Tonyan, especially these last couple of years coming back from the injury, wasn't quite the same. It's not like Mercedes Lewis is attacking the middle of the field. Amari Rodgers didn't work out. There's only so much you can do with an aging Randall Cobb. Adding a Jaden Reed and a Luke Musgrave to the middle of the field is going to make it a lot more appealing for Jordan to throw over the middle than if he had some of those same weapons that Aaron had. So it wasn't all just on Aaron, but it was definitely a big piece of it. So that inability and unwant to throw over the middle of the field was largely due to Aaron. But I think having a few extra weapons there for Jordan is going to make it more likely. And I think Jordan has a little bit more Brett to him where he's willing to sling a few balls here and there and be like, let's see what happens, for better or worse. I think there's going to be some more playmaking made over the middle of the field. There's going to be some more interceptions. This is not going to be, I think, a spoiler for anyone or anything shocking. Jordan's going to throw more picks than Aaron did. Like I said, Aaron threw less interceptions than any quarterback in the history of the world. So Jordan's going to throw more. And part of that's going to be his use of the middle of the field. It just is what it is. But I think you're going to see a lot more explosive plays, and it's going to open up some of the offense that has been closed down since before Matt LaFleur even got here. So there's some fun with that. There's going to be some risk that's involved with that as well. All right. I am not even going to try to pronounce the name. Massimiliano Marga. Yeah, we're done there. But Massimiliano, thanks so much for the chat. Really appreciate that. Checking in from Italy to say thanks for your work. That is super kind of you. Got to Italy earlier this year. My first time ever traveling out of the country. Spent a week in Italy. Went to Rome, Florence, Venice, and Lake Como. 100 out of 100. Absolutely recommend. Lake Como was my favorite. Beyond loved it. I felt like it was less touristy and more just pure Italy. And then just the insane, just the insane views. Like when people say like pictures don't do it justice, pictures cannot do that place justice. Beyond breathtaking and amazing. Loved Italy. And thanks so much for checking in from Italy, Massimiliano, which I'm sure I'm not pronouncing correctly, but it was really fun to say nonetheless. All right. Hebes Hebes from Sheboygan again. If Matt LaFleur says he wants the 5 best offensive linemen on the field, he thinks Josh Myers is better than Rasheed Walker. That's an interesting one. I think for now the answer is yes. And what I went over this a little bit ago, and what I kind of ultimately came to the conclusion of, and it was more Yosh Nijman based at the time than it was Rasheed Walker, but I think Zach Tom is better at right tackle than he is at center. And I think the difference between Josh Myers and either Yosh or Rasheed at this point is not great. And you could make the argument Rasheed's better than Josh, or that I actually think Josh is better than Yosh. Let me start by saying that. I think you can make the argument that Rasheed is better than better than Josh Myers, but I think you can make the argument that it's made up by the fact that Zach is better at right tackle than he is at center. That's my opinion, and my opinion only. But I think Zach looks really good at right tackle. He looked okay, fine at center. So if it were me going into week 1, I would go with Bakhtiari at left tackle. I would go with Jenkins at left guard, Myers at center, Runyon at right guard, and Zach Tom at right tackle. But I would have a very short leash on Josh Myers, where if he doesn't play well, we're going to try something different. I think the other thing you have to be cognizant of is that you're never quite exactly sure what you're going to get with David Bakhtiari and his knee. So if they really feel like Rasheed is the next guy up and they want him to be the swing tackle and the left tackle in case of emergency and David can't play, then maybe you don't want to move him to right tackle so quickly and and put him there. Maybe you still want him at left tackle in case something happens to Bakhtiari. So I understand the decision. I do think it's close. It wouldn't shock me if at some point this year we got Bakhtiari, Jenkins, Zach Tom, John Runyon Jr., and Rasheed Walker at right tackle. But for now, going into the season, I think I would have done the same thing that LaFleur seems to be doing at this point with going with Josh at center. Hi, Adam Smith. Just want to say thanks for all you do. Pack-A-Day is daily watch for me, and I feel like I learn more about football with each episode. Adam, super kind of you. By the way, I will say this now. Just launched subscriptions for the Pack-A-Day podcast YouTube channel right here on YouTube today, just like literally like an hour and a half ago. So they're out there now. They are up. The content will start coming next week. There will be members only exclusive videos that will be posted. Hopefully, eventually doing some special guest videos with that as well. I will be doing a weekly Q&A for members only. There's a lot of other perks that you can get out there. I'm going to be doing a NFL Pick'em contest with all members as well. That some prizes will be involved. I'm thinking of putting 2 tickets to a regular season game next year on the line for the winner of the Pick'em contest this year. So I'm going to do some really fun stuff with it. So go out there, make sure to subscribe, become a member, and I will do my best to not let you down if you do so. All right, Preston, and thanks again, Adam, for that chat. Really nice of you. Preston, hopefully this isn't the case, but if Jordan Love is flat out bad and the Jets don't do well, would you trade up to draft Caleb Williams? There will be no trading up for Caleb Williams. The team that ends up at number 1 will draft Caleb Williams. I don't think there's any alternate reality in which that's the case. If the Cardinals get number 1, which I think they will, they are drafting Caleb Williams. I think even if there's a team like, let's take the Commanders, for instance. Let's say Sam Howell has a nice year and you're like, wow, Sam Howell did some nice things. It's probably not the case if they ended up as the worst team in football, but they will take Caleb Williams. Even if there's a team that has like a decent starting quarterback, Daniel Jones, whatever, they will take Caleb Williams. So I don't think any team is trading out of that spot. He is the best quarterback prospect that I think we've seen since Andrew Luck. I will wait to putting my official stamp of approval on that until we see his tape from this year. I know we've got 1 game in, but until we see it in totality, I would be shocked if he doesn't go number 1 overall. And I don't think anyone is trading out of that spot. So if the Packers want Caleb Williams, they better hope that Jordan Love is extremely bad and they start being bad right away, because there's no way that anyone's trading into that spot. Whoever is in that spot is taking them. And I'm being facetious, by the way. Nobody's hoping they do bad or that Jordan Love's bad. All right, just a couple more, and then I have to get out of here. Ryan, this is a really interesting question. Could Josh be a better guard than Runyon? I think the answer is no. I think John Runyon is just a better player than Josh Myers, period, end of story. So I'll start there. I do think there's a world in which Josh Myers might be a better guard than he is a center. And I'm sort of surprised that they've never tried something like that. I thought maybe they would try Elton at center this year and Josh at left guard or right guard, just to see at some point, especially with all the movement that they've done at center and guard and moving everyone and 5 best players, etc. Like, I thought at some point they would try a few different things, but they just never did. I thought there's times where it feels like Josh is maybe thinking a little bit too much, and there's just more thinking at center. And it's not to say that guards and tackles don't have to do thinking as well. They do, but you have to be cognizant of the count and like keeping an eye on everything. And there's just a lot more thinking that is involved in the blitz pickups and the protection calls that there is at center than there is everywhere else. And sometimes I feel like when Josh is just playing, he's pretty good, but when he's maybe overthinking things, you can kind of see it on the field. So I thought maybe a move to guard would do him better. They've never really done that. I don't think he's ever taken a practice snap at guard that I can remember, at least not this year. He certainly hasn't. So yeah, I don't know. They clearly feel that that's not the case and they want to keep him at center. I understand it for now, but either way, I think Runyon's just a better player. But I do think that there's maybe a world in which he is a better guard than he is a center. All right, a couple more super chats and we're getting out of here. Vex, thanks for this. Okay, based on what you have seen, what do you expect from Love this year? I'm expecting decent yards and touchdowns, but 12 to 16 interceptions. I think that's probably about right. I think similar numbers to Aaron last year. If you look at his final stat line, I think it's going to be very similar with a few more interceptions. That's what my official prediction would be, which isn't bad for a first-time starter. I don't know what to expect from a ceiling this year for Jordan Love. If you told me he was top 10, top 15, top 20, top 25, sure, any of it, that's where he could end up. I do think the floor is significantly higher from what I've seen from Jordan. He's far too in command of the offense. He knows where to go with the ball. He makes great decisions. We've seen it all training camp and preseason long. He knows how to navigate the pocket, keep his eyes downfield. There's way too much to work for there for him to be bad. I would be very surprised if he's just awful or bad or really bad or anything like that. The ceiling he reaches and how good he can be, a lot of that's going to be dependent upon his accuracy. A lot of that's going to be dependent upon how he reacts to teams throwing everything at him and seeing what he struggles with. And then can he overcome that? And then just kind of overcoming adversity through the course of the season. So there's a difference between being a quarterback that you can win games with and being a quarterback that you can win games because of. I think you can win games with Jordan Love, period. I don't know yet if you can win games because of Jordan Love. That's what he has to go out and show this upcoming season and just kind of beyond. And I don't expect it right away. Like, there needs to be some leeway there, but in this year and next year, can he show at some point that he is the reason that this team is winning games? That's the really big step that Jordan needs to take next. All right, Jack, last one. Any chance Van Ness plays inside at all week 1? I do think they'll move him around. It's interesting that they basically did not, use him inside at all in camp. Maybe they used him a play or two here or there, but for the most part, he was on the outside. I know in one of the last training camps, he practiced individual drills with the defensive linemen. So I do think we see that at some point this year. Not sure how much he's going to play week 1. You're going to have Gary, Preston, you're going to have Enigbare, and then I think Justin Hollins might get some snaps as well. I'm going to assume Brenton Cox is probably inactive that first week, but it'll be interesting how they divvy up those pass rush snaps and just edge rusher snaps in general, and how they kind of rotate those guys in and out. That'll be one of the unique things to kind of keep an eye on under the radar week 1, but we'll see how much he plays inside, and we'll just kind of see how much he plays, period, in that week 1 game against Chicago. All right, friends, I have got to get going. I will say cheers one more time. Remember, Pack-A-Day subscriptions are up and live on YouTube, so make sure to check those out. 4 different levels, tons of different perks. So make sure to join if you are willing and able to do so. Appreciate all the super chats today. Ian, Incoming Options Trading, Lee, Real Stretch Sports Talk, Vex, Massimiliano, Adam Smith, Preston Mayer, Vex again, Jack. Really appreciate you guys. I'll be right back here tomorrow with an all-new episode, so check that out as well. But until next time, and as always,